Hola, in this video we're going to talk about the present subjunctive, and the present subjunctive is a mood in the present tense. So what that means is that the subjunctive is not a tense itself. The subjunctive is a mood within the present tense. And there also exists a subjunctive of the perfect tense used for past tense, but the present subjunctive stays with the present tense. And there's a distinction between the subjunctive and the indicative. Indicative is the other mood that we're a little bit more accustomed to. In Spanish 1, when you started to learn to describe things, that was all in the indicative. So let's take a look at some examples so we can talk about when it is that we use this subjunctive mood in the present tense. So then here's an example in the indicative mood. The example is mis estudiantes hablan español. So in this statement, I use the indicative mood for the verb hablar, the conjugation hablan. I use indicative because it's a statement. It's a statement of fact, and there's nothing else really going on there. Just the fact that I'm saying mis estudiantes hablan español. When we deal with the verb hablar, we are saying whether they do or do not speak Spanish. So then an example in the subjunctive of an idea that's similar but slightly different would be me gusta que mis estudiantes hablen español. And you can see that when I conjugated the verb hablar here, I used a different conjugation. I said hablen as opposed to hablar. And that is because I needed to use the subjunctive mood for this verb here. And I needed to use that because I used the phrase me gusta. So I was simply describing the fact that I like that my students speak Spanish. So the focus in this statement is not on the students speaking Spanish. It's more on my perception of it, more of my opinion and my feeling that I like that this happens. And so the question then is, when do we use the subjunctive? And the answer is whenever we're talking about any kind of opinion, if we have suggestions, wishes, or desires that something happen, or a type of uncertainty. And you could get more specific with this list, but this summarizes the basic uses of the subjunctive. You use the subjunctive when you're stating someone's opinion or uncertainty or something that they want to happen, and you use the indicative when you're simply stating that something happens or that something happened in the past, or maybe that something did not happen. Indicative is used to focus on the action itself, whereas the subjunctive is used to describe someone's opinions or feelings or uncertainty about that action. So now let's talk about how we conjugate or form these verbs in the subjunctive. So what you do is you take your verb and you think back to the yo form of the present tense indicative, the forms that you probably learned to begin with. And so for this verb we have yo hablo. And then we take from this conjugation, we cross off that O at the end of it, and we use that remaining stem. We have and let's say we're conjugating for the L form. And then we add our ending like we're used to. Now for the subjunctive, for el, the present subjunctive, the ending is a, so él hable. As in, I like that he speaks Spanish. Me gusta que hable español. Let me bring back my example here so I can show you then the whole context of what a sentence with the subjunctive looks like. So here we have our sentence with the subjunctive, me gusta que mis estudiantes hablen español, and we have the three parts of it. So part one is the trigger phrase, me gusta. Since I'm using gusta, it implies that we're eventually going to need the subjunctive. Part two is our connector, which almost always will be que, but there are some other words you could use. And then part three is the clause, like a mini sentence, which uses the subjunctive in its conjugation. And it's because I use the phrase me gusta that required me to conjugate the verb hablar in the subjunctive mood, because me gusta implies opinion. Now when it comes to the endings for the subjunctive, they're not too complicated, but it might get a little confusing because of how similar they look to the conjugations in the indicative mood. So for AR verbs, such as hablar, for the yo form, the ending a, to o vos form, es, él y usted form, nosotros, nosotras, hemos, vosotros, vosotras, es, ellos, ustedes, and. Now if you think back to the indicative conjugations from Spanish 1, they look very similar to the ER-IR endings. But these are the endings for AR verbs when conjugated in the subjunctive mood. And these are the endings for ER and IR verbs when conjugated in the subjunctive mood, in the present tense. And again, you will think that they look a little strange because they have the letter A used so much, even though they're for the ER and IR verbs. So sometimes we think of these as the flipped endings, because they use the letter of the other endings than what you think they would be. But these are, in fact, the correct ones. All right, so now let's do a little bit of practice. Go ahead and take a moment to conjugate each of the verbs for the given subject. So for number one, conjugate comer for to. And now go ahead and press pause on the video to give yourself some time to complete these. When we come back, then we'll go over the answers. Alright, so let's start to go over the answers here. Comer, to. Remember what we do is we take the yo form in the present tense, indicative, cross off the o, use that remaining stem, and then find our ending. It's an ER verb for the to form. So we go down to ER, to form, to comas. Number two, remember that we take the yo form, which is different. Drop the o off the end of it, so for tener ella would actually be tenga. It's an ER verb, so we use the a ending, but we do attach it to the teng stem because that comes from the yo form in the present tense. Similar with number three, dormir. Remember that the yo form is duermo, so we use that stem and add the ustedes form for an IR verb. Ustedes duerman. Number four, estudiar, nosotros. Yo form is simply estudio, nothing different there. Estudi, nosotros form for an AR verb to give us hemos, estudiemos. And then number five, textear, yo. The yo form would be texteo, it's just a regular verb. Get rid of that O at the end of it. Text, pay, and then it's an AR verb for the yo form, so texte. Now sometimes it seems a little pointless to do the yo form and then cross it off because sometimes it doesn't make any difference, but a lot of times it does make a difference. So you do want to think about what is that yo form in the present tense indicative to be able to properly conjugate in the subjunctive.